Okay, guys, here is the second topic for this week, and it goes really. Oh, my dog Zoe does not like this topic. It goes really well with the Vietnam War because it has to do with protests and whatnot. Hang on. Zoe, thank you, good girl. In what's called the counterculture. Now, I have to make an admission here. I do know about the counterculture. I do understand it, but I feel like I really missed out in learning about the counterculture when I was taking a California history class my senior year of college, UC Davis, with what became one of my favorite professors ever. This class was at 8 a.m. on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I know it doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you're in college, that's early. And I happened to miss one class, and I know that Sam loves my crazy cat stories, but on Sunday night I was driving home from Woodland where I kept my horse Daiquiri, and I hit a cat. And this was really traumatic for me. Was laying in the road, and I luckily was in a truck, so I didn't run him over, but I did hit him. And I didn't know what to do, and I was very upset because I love cats so much. And I called my dad, and he's like, well, you have to call animal control. And we couldn't figure out who animal control was in Yolo County. Turns out it was a sheriff. So I called 911, really to call non-emergency dispatch, but I didn't know that at the time. Anyways, they sent the sheriff out. They picked up the cat, threw him in the animal control truck, and that was that. And I was so distraught over the whole thing, and it was so late that I slept in and did not go to my 8 a.m. class the next morning. And I missed the lecture on the counterculture. So I feel like I should be able to add way more stuff. But anyways, the good news is that the cat did survive. He only had a laceration. He needed some stitches. It was on his side. And they let me adopt him. So I adopted him, and his name was Martin. And he began my love affair with Black and White Tuxedo Cat because he was about the coolest cat ever. And anyways, so you guys know I got little Gronkowski this year, my other Black and White, and I also have Gordon. So I like Black and White cats a lot. But anyways, so that's my little story on the counterculture. But counterculture is just gonna basically it's gonna reference the culture that went against quote unquote traditional culture. Okay, so as this time, the 1960s is going on, the Vietnam War is going on. The Vietnam War is the policy of the government. Containment is the policy of the government. So the counter response to that is the protest movement. Okay, and honestly, as the war dragged on and on and on, this became more of the American culture. Did not support the war because it became very unfavorable, especially when that draft started happening and whatnot. So, hey guys, I put this the same information here that was on there earlier. We've got the Students for Democratic Society. You guys, I just want to bring them back because they are really organizing these large-scale protests. They called for a lot of different things, but one of them was the ending of the Vietnam War. And when I Googled Students for Democratic Society, this was an image that was attributed to them. You can see one other reason why I picked it, though, is over here, this guy's sign here, War on Poverty, Not on People. In the previous topic, I told you guys that Lyndon Johnson, he wanted to create this Great Society, and he did. The Great Society programs modeled after the New Deal programs. And he did, but he couldn't fund all the programs he wanted to. So again, we're going to look at that Great Society a little bit later with this ongoing, they call it the persistence of poverty, right? So we've got the end of Vietnam War here, and we also have this war on poverty. And then again, the Students for Democratic Society, you can see they have a lot of issues that they want to deal with. And we're going to come back to some of the other civil rights movements after we talk about African Americans. We'll focus on them, but we'll talk about some of the other groups that fought for equality during this time that the Students for Democratic Society were also involved with. Okay, this slide I thought was kind of an interesting picture to put on the slide. Sorry, this Google Slides thing keeps coming up. It's annoying me. You know, Students for Democratic Society, like was on the previous slide, Black Panthers, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, all of these groups actually assailed or attacked or vocalized against liberals for not doing enough to promote social change. So again, President Kennedy is elected in 1960. He's assassinated in 1963. He's a Democrat. Lyndon Johnson is going to become the president in 1963. He runs for his own office in 64. He wins. He could have run again in 68. He decided not to. This was a huge thing when he said he wasn't going to. And he said he wasn't going to because he didn't want to campaign while the country was at war. He felt that would divide his ability to do either one well, and he felt like he had to focus on the war. But anyway, so in 68, you have Bobby Kennedy, who I told you about previously, President Kennedy's younger brother, excuse me, not youngest. He had left as Attorney General and went to New York and became a senator from New York and ran. He won the California primary and then was assassinated in 1968. So anyway, so 68, Hubert Humphrey was running. I think he was the eventual nominee. I should know that. Sorry. I should have gone to my favorite website, 270 to Win, and looked at the electoral maps, but you can do that, and maybe I'll do that when I'm done, because now I'm curious. I think McGovern was in there for a while, but anyway, so in 68, this is when Richard Nixon is elected president, and Richard Nixon was a conservative, and so while Lyndon Johnson was president, these groups said, hey, you're not doing enough, which is kind of a little ironic because Johnson was pretty liberal, especially when we get into those Great Society programs. Okay, guys, so just wait for that. But again, he was limited in what he could do based on money. He just didn't have the money. He was fighting a war. So that really constricted him. I think a lot more than he really wanted to. I've done some reading on him. He's an interesting guy. But anyways, Black Panther Party, one of the earliest things this group did, you guys, was make sure that unwed or single mothers could get milk for their children. So if you ever go to the grocery store and you see little labels, they say WIC. That is a government subsidized program. And the Black Panther Party was a group that kind of had the foundations of that. So now we have that in place today. But anyways, and here are some of these other groups. Again, this is just a time of radical, protesting. It was around every corner. Okay. Now, one kind of fun protest, I guess, known as the Summer of Love, was Woodstock. And this is seen by many Americans as kind of this pinnacle of the counterculture. Like all these hippies out in New York, in the forests of New York, at this concert for days. So this is kind of a fun little link. Sorry, yes, there are drugs at Woodstock. But anyways, I previewed the link on the history of Woodstock, and it's clean. You can watch that. But I want to remind you when we talk about generations. So, like, for example, I've asked my dad this when he was drafted in Vietnam, when he didn't want to go to Vietnam. How did that affect his relationship with his dad, the older generation? Because my grandfather had fought in World War II, and he fought under Patton. He was in North Africa. He was in the Italian invasion. So like, how did that affect that relationship? And so this difference between these guys who had gone off to war very bravely in World War II, and now their sons are like, don't really want to do this. That's going to cause familial strife, right? That's going to cause problems in the family. I will say a lot of dads agreed with their kids and didn't want their kids to go off and fight. Because again, remember, it wasn't like in World War II, you're fighting the Nazis, you're fighting the people that, the Japanese who attacked us at Pearl Harbor, right? You are fighting against an ideology, and that's really hard to wrap your mind around, what are we fighting for? It wasn't that like that in every family where every family had this generational strife, but certainly in many there were. And Woodstock, I think a lot of the older generation looked at this and just was like, oh my goodness, like, get a job, like today when you guys say, okay, boomers, the boomers, they were saying that to these guys, but not okay, boomers. I don't know what they were saying to them, but generational strife. Look, all right, I tied it to today. All right, guys. Hey, on the other side of the political spectrum were the Young Americans for Freedom, and this group still exists today, as do some of the others. This is a conservative youth group, okay? So it wasn't just the crazy liberals in the hippies, right, fighting the counterculture movement. You also have the This group's like this. This is the kind of the biggest one. But this is a conservative youth activist group that worked across college campuses, and they were fighting for conservative ideas. And you can see that by the signs that we've got right here. So in one side, Lexington wants to tell it to Hanoi. Hanoi was the capital of Vietnam. The other one, Vietnam, we're in, let's win, right? So these are on the other side of the spectrum. So Richard Nixon, when he was elected in 68, he was a conservative. He struggled with the Vietnam War also. He did a lot, but he also had this thing where he really liked to be liked. And so, he empowered conservative groups, conservative ideology. He did things that were favorable with the American people. One of the big things he had an impact on, you guys, was the environment. So more on that later, but the environment, all these like Clean Air Acts, all these environmental acts were passed during this time because the people wanted it and he gave it to them and then they liked him more. So it's kind of this weird Nixon kind of a thing. But anyway, so this group I think grew in prominence at this time because Nixon was a conservative and he was the president, and I'm sure he loved that this group existed, and he reached out to them and whatnot because they were more supportive of his ideas. In the Republican Party ideas. But I just think it's kind of a cool thing to remember. Even with Franklin Roosevelt, remember, Republicans thought he was way too liberal, but then there were liberals who thought he wasn't liberal enough. So a lot of the time, these politicians, you really can't win. You're not going to please everyone, and you're not going to please a lot of people. But again, bring this back, American college campuses, you guys, students across college campuses were the leaders in this counterculture movement. And one big movement that isn't on here was the free speech movement, which was started by Mario Savio at Cal Berkeley. So that's a little local connection to that. Okay, so I think, yep, that's it for week 2, just 2 sections. You got lots of optional activities to do, and please complete chapter 37. All right, guys, thanks.